The woman's voice carried across the empty pasture like a lullaby meant for children, soft and tender as she spoke to the line of cattle standing along the fence, and Marcus Montgomery stopped dead in his tracks, certain he had finally lost his mind after 3 months of working this desolate ranch alone. It was late summer in 1882, and the heat of Independence, Missouri hung heavy in the air, thick enough to make a man question everything he saw. Marcus had inherited the ranch from his uncle 6 months prior, a sprawling piece of land that bordered the Missouri River with more cattle than he knew what to do with and not a single soul for company except the animals. His uncle had been a recluse, and Marcus was beginning to understand why. The isolation did strange things to a person, but this melodic voice drifting through the afternoon stillness, this had to be real. He moved closer, his boots crushing the dry grass beneath his feet, each step deliberate as he approached the eastern pasture where his cattle grazed. The voice grew clearer, and he could make out words now, gentle reassurances and observations about the weather, about the way the clouds looked like cotton pulled apart by invisible hands. Marcus rounded the bend of the split rail fence and froze. A young woman stood among his cattle, her hand extended toward a particularly large heifer that had always been skittish around him. The heifer was nuzzling her palm, docile as a lamb. The woman wore a simple dress of faded blue calico, dust coating the hem, and her dark hair had been pinned up but was coming loose in the humidity. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, and she was the most beautiful thing Marcus had seen in longer than he cared to admit. "You're such a sweet girl," the woman was saying to the heifer. "I know you must get lonely out here, all of you bunched together, but with no one to really talk to you to tell you that you matter. Everyone needs to know they matter." Marcus cleared his throat, and the woman spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Her eyes went wide, a startling shade of amber that caught the sunlight, and her hand flew to her chest. "I am so sorry," she stammered. "I did not mean to trespass. I was just walking and I heard them making those sounds, those sad, lonely sounds, and I thought perhaps they needed someone to talk to them." Marcus studied her for a long moment, taking in the earnestness in her expression, the way she seemed genuinely concerned that she had done something wrong. Most people would have thought him mad for keeping so many cattle with so little help, would have laughed at the notion that animals could be lonely. But this woman, whoever she was, had heard the same thing he had felt in his bones every day since arriving here, the loneliness that permeated everything on this land. "They did," Marcus said finally, and the woman blinked at him in confusion. "Need a kind voice, I mean. They needed someone to talk to them. I have been too busy trying to keep everything running to give them much attention, and cattle are social creatures. They get lonely just like people do." The tension in the woman's shoulders eased slightly, though she still looked ready to bolt if he gave her reason. "You do not think I am foolish, then, for talking to animals as though they were people?" "No more foolish than I am for thinking the same thing every time I pass their pen," Marcus replied. He took a step closer, careful not to startle her the way he might spook a wild horse. "I am Marcus Montgomery. This is my ranch, though I have only been here since spring. My uncle left it to me when he passed." "Zara Novak," the woman said, and her voice trembled slightly on her own name. "I live about 3 miles east with my aunt. I was walking because I needed to think, and I suppose I wandered farther than I intended." Marcus nodded slowly. He knew the Novak property, a small farm that barely produced enough to keep 2 people fed. He had seen smoke from their chimney, but had never ventured over to introduce himself. Neighborliness had never been his strong suit. "You are welcome to visit the cattle any time you like," Marcus heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. "They could use the company, and I reckon it would do them good to hear a voice that is not mine barking orders at them all day." Zara's face transformed when she smiled, her whole countenance brightening like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Do you mean that? I would not want to be a bother." "You would be doing me a favor," Marcus insisted. "A ranch this size, it needs more than one person to run it properly, and I have been managing alone since my uncle's hired hands left when he died. The cattle have been neglected in ways I am not proud of. If you want to come by and talk to them, spend time with them, I would be grateful." He did not add that he would also be grateful for human company, for someone to break up the monotony of his days. That seemed too forward, too desperate, even though it was the truth. Zara looked back at the heifer, which had returned to grazing, then at Marcus. "I could come by tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. My aunt needs help with the morning chores, but after midday I am usually free." "Tomorrow afternoon would be fine," Marcus agreed, and something warm unfurled in his chest, something he had not felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. Zara excused herself shortly after, heading back in the direction she had come with a promise to return the next day. Marcus watched her go, her figure growing smaller against the backdrop of rolling fields until she disappeared entirely. Only then did he turn back to his cattle, and he could have sworn the heifer was looking at him with something resembling approval. The next afternoon arrived with the same oppressive heat, but Marcus found himself caring less about the sweat soaking through his shirt, and more about whether Zara would actually return. He had spent the morning repairing a section of fence that had been sagging for weeks, work he had been putting off because it seemed pointless when there was always something else demanding his attention. But now, with the possibility of a visitor, he wanted the place to look less like a bachelor's neglected inheritance and more like a functioning ranch. He was hauling water to the cattle trough when he saw her approaching, a basket swinging from one arm. She wore the same dress as yesterday, but she had managed to tame her hair into a neat braid that hung over one shoulder. Marcus set down the bucket and wiped his hands on his pants, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. "You came?" he said, and immediately felt like an idiot for stating the obvious. "I said I would," Zara replied. And there was that smile again, the one that made him feel like maybe the world was not as bleak as he had convinced himself it was. "I brought some apples from our trees. I thought the cattle might enjoy them." "That is kind of you," Marcus said, and he meant it. He had been feeding the cattle hay and grain, the basics to keep them alive, but he had not thought about treats or anything that might make their existence more pleasant. Zara, on the other hand, had thought of it immediately. They walked together to the pasture, and Zara wasted no time in distributing apple slices to the eager cattle. She talked to each one as though they were old friends, commenting on the patterns of their hides, the expressions in their eyes, the way they jostled each other to get closer to her. Marcus found himself leaning against the fence, watching her more than the animals, fascinated by the ease with which she moved among them. "Have you always had a way with animals?" he asked after a while. Zara glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression thoughtful. "I suppose so. When I was a child, my family had a farm in Ohio. We had horses, chickens, a few cows. I used to spend hours in the barn just sitting with them. My father said I was wasting time, that there was always work to be done, but my mother understood. She told me that animals could sense kindness, that they needed it just as much as people did." "Your parents, are they still in Ohio?" The light in Zara's eyes dimmed, and Marcus regretted the question instantly. "They passed away 4 years ago. Cholera swept through our town, and they were among the many who did not survive. My aunt, my mother's sister, was living here in Missouri with her husband. When he died 2 years ago, she wrote to me and asked if I would come stay with her. She needed help, and I had nowhere else to go, so I came." "I am sorry," Marcus said, and the words felt inadequate, but he did not know what else to offer. Losing people you love? It leaves a hole that nothing can quite fill. "It does," Zara agreed quietly. She turned back to the cattle, running her hand along the heifer's neck. "But you learn to live around it. You find new reasons to keep going even when everything feels hopeless." They fell into a companionable silence after that, the kind that did not need to be filled with pointless chatter. Marcus appreciated that about her, the way she seemed comfortable with quiet, with simply being present. So many people he had known felt the need to fill every moment with words, as though silence was something to be feared. But Zara understood that sometimes silence was its own kind of communication. When the apples were gone and the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, Zara brushed her hands on her skirt and picked up her empty basket. I should be getting back. My aunt will worry if I'm gone too long. Will you come again? Marcus asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice and failing. If you will have me, Zara said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she was asking for more than just permission to visit his cattle. I will have you, Marcus assured her. Anytime you want to come by, you are welcome here. Over the following weeks, Zara became a fixture on the ranch, arriving most afternoons with treats for the cattle and stories that made Marcus laugh in ways he had almost forgotten how to. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about the mischief she and her siblings had gotten into, about her mother's garden that had been the envy of their entire town. Marcus, in turn, found himself sharing pieces of his own past, things he had not spoken about in years. He told her about growing up in Kentucky, about his father's blacksmith shop and the way the heat from the forge had made summer almost unbearable. He told her about his mother who had died when he was 15, and how his father had followed her only 3 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as though he had decided he was done living without her. He told her about the years he had spent drifting from town to town, taking work where he could find it, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots because he had not seen the point. And then your uncle left you this place, Zara said one afternoon as they sat on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the cattle graze in the distance. She had started staying longer with each visit, and Marcus had taken to offering her lemonade or water, any excuse to keep her around a little while more. And then he left me this place, Marcus echoed. I had not seen him in years, not since I was a boy. I barely remembered him, but he had no children of his own, and I was his only living relative, so here I am. Do you like it? Zara asked, turning to look at him. Being here, I mean, running a ranch by yourself in the middle of nowhere. Marcus considered the question carefully. A month ago, he would have said no without hesitation. He would have told her that he felt trapped, that the loneliness was suffocating, that he was counting the days until he could sell the place and move on to wherever came next. But now, with Zara sitting beside him, her presence as steady and reassuring as the ground beneath his feet, he found his answer had changed. I am starting to, he admitted. It is hard work, and there are days when I feel like I am drowning in everything that needs to be done. But it is mine, you know. For the first time in my life, I have something that belongs to me. A place where I can build something permanent. And lately it has felt less lonely. Zara's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away, but not before Marcus caught the pleased expression on her face. The cattle do seem happier since I started visiting. I was not talking about the cattle, Marcus said, his voice low, and Zara's blush deepened. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Marcus wanted to reach over and take her hand, to pull her close and tell her that she had become the best part of his days, that he woke up every morning looking forward to the afternoon when she would arrive. But he held back, unsure if she felt the same way, afraid of scaring her off. It was Zara who broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. I look forward to coming here, Marcus, more than I probably should. My aunt has started asking questions about where I disappear to every afternoon, and I do not know what to tell her. Tell her the truth, Marcus suggested. Tell her you're visiting a neighbor, helping with his livestock. She will want to meet you, Zara warned, and she will have questions, the kind that aunts ask when they think a young woman is spending too much time alone with a man. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. And what will you tell her when she asks those questions? Zara met his gaze, her amber eyes unflinching. I will tell her that I care about you, and that I think you care about me, and that I'm old enough to decide who I spend my time with. The honesty in her words struck Marcus like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. He had known on some level that his feelings for Zara had grown beyond simple friendship, but hearing her acknowledge her own feelings made it real in a way that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. I do care about you, Marcus said, his voice rough. More than I have cared about anyone in a long time. You walked onto my property talking to my cattle like they were people, and you turned everything upside down in the best possible way. I do not want you to stop coming here, Zara. I do not think I could stand it if you did. Zara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she was smiling. That brilliant smile that made Marcus feel like he could accomplish anything. Then I will not stop. And if my aunt has concerns, I will bring her to meet you, and you can charm her the way you have charmed me. I have charmed you, says itin aro, Segi. Marcus asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. Terribly, Zara confirmed. You and your lonely cattle, and your rough hands, and your kind heart, I never stood a chance. Marcus reached over then, taking her hand in his, and Zara's fingers curled around his, warm and sure. They sat like that as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And Marcus thought that this moment right here was worth every hard day, every lonely night he had endured to get here. The meeting with Zara's aunt happened the following week, and it went better than Marcus had dared to hope. Zara Novak was a sturdy woman in her late 40s with the same amber eyes as her niece, and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Marcus of his own mother. She arrived at the ranch with Zara, looking around with an appraising eye that missed nothing. "So you are the young man who has been occupying my niece's afternoons?" Clara said by way of greeting, her tone neutral but her gaze sharp. "Yes, madam," Marcus replied, extending his hand. "Marcus Montgomery, it is a pleasure to meet you." Clara shook his hand, her grip firm. "I will decide if it is a pleasure after I have had a chance to look around and ask you a few questions. Zara speaks highly of you, but I need to see for myself what kind of man you are." Marcus appreciated her directness. "That is fair. I would expect nothing less if I were in your position." He gave Clara a tour of the ranch, showing her the cattle, the barn, the fields where he planned to plant crops come spring. He answered her questions honestly, explaining his plans for the property, his financial situation, and his intentions toward Zara, which were at this point entirely honorable, even if his feelings were decidedly romantic. Clara listened without interrupting, her expression giving away nothing. When the tour concluded back at the farmhouse, she turned to Marcus and studied him for a long moment. "You seem like a decent man, Marcus Montgomery," Clara said finally, "and it is clear that you care for my niece. But I need to know that you understand what you are asking for. Zara has been through a great deal of loss in her young life. Her parents, her home, everything she knew was taken from her. If you are going to be part of her life, I need to know that you are committed, that you will not break her heart because you decide ranching is too hard or because you get restless and want to move on." Marcus met Clara's gaze squarely. "I understand your concern, and I respect it. I have spent most of my adult life moving from place to place because I did not have a reason to stay anywhere. But this ranch, it is mine, and I am not going anywhere. And Zara, she has given me something I did not know I was missing. Purpose, hope, a reason to build something that lasts. I cannot promise that everything will be easy, but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to make her happy and to give her the life she deserves." Clara's stern expression softened slightly and she nodded. "That is all I needed to hear. Zara is a grown woman and she can make her own choices, but I wanted to make sure you understood what those choices mean." With Clara's cautious blessing, Marcus and Zara's relationship deepened. They still spent their afternoons with the cattle, but now they also spent time talking about the future, about what their lives might look like together. Marcus found himself thinking about things he had never considered before, like adding onto the farmhouse to create more space, like planting a garden that Zara could tend, like the sound of children's laughter filling the empty spaces that had felt so oppressive when he first arrived. Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures and the changing of leaves, and Marcus realized he had been in Independence for nearly 8 months. It was the longest he had stayed in one place since his father's death, and for the first time he had no desire to leave. His life had taken on a rhythm that felt right, felt sustainable. He woke before dawn to tend the animals, spent his mornings working the land, and looked forward to the afternoons when Zara would arrive, bringing light and warmth to his days. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, Marcus turned to Zara and took both of her hands in his. "I have been thinking," he began, his heart pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it, "about us, about the future. And I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards, but I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Zara's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Marcus, what are you saying?" Marcus slid off his chair and onto one knee, still holding her hands. "I am saying that I love you, Zara Novak. I love the way you talk to my cattle, the way you see the good in everything, the way you make me want to be a better man. I love the sound of your laugh and the way your eyes light up when you smile. I love every single thing about you, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Zara's face, but she was nodding before he even finished the question. "Yes, yes, Marcus, I will marry you. I love you too, so much that sometimes it scares me. You gave me a place to belong when I felt lost, and I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you." Marcus surged to his feet and pulled Zara into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up longing and love he had been holding back for months. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair. And when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. They were married in early December at the small church in Independence, with Clara and a handful of neighbors in attendance. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Zara wore a dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her, and Marcus wore his best suit, which he had not worn since his uncle's funeral. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed Zara as though sealing a promise, and he felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. The newlyweds settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. Zara brought warmth and order to the farmhouse, transforming it from a bachelor's functional space into a real home. She hung curtains in the windows, planted herbs in pots on the windowsills, and filled the rooms with small touches that made Marcus smile every time he noticed them. A quilt draped over the back of the sofa, a vase of dried flowers on the kitchen table, the smell of bread baking in the oven. Zara also proved to be an invaluable partner in running the ranch. She took over the care of the cattle with a dedication that amazed Marcus, learning everything she could about their needs and behaviors. She developed a system for tracking which cows were pregnant, which ones needed extra feed, which ones had temperaments that required careful handling. The cattle thrived under her attention, and Marcus often joked that they loved her more than they loved him. "They probably do," Zara would reply with a laugh. "I am the one who talks to them and brings them treats. You are the one who makes them work." But Marcus worked alongside them too, harder than he ever had, because now he had something worth working for. He expanded the herd, bought a few horses to make managing the property easier, and started selling beef to markets in Kansas City, which was only a day's ride away. The ranch began to turn a profit, not a fortune by any means, but enough to feel secure, to plan for the future. Winter brought snow and bitter cold, forcing Marcus and Zara to spend more time indoors. They used those months to strengthen their bond, sharing stories by the fireplace, reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned, and dreaming about the spring to come. Zara proved to be an excellent cook, able to make even the simplest ingredients taste like a feast, and Marcus made sure to tell her so at every meal. One night, as they lay in bed with the wind howling outside, Zara turned to Marcus and said, "I want to tell you something, but I'm afraid of how you will react." Marcus propped himself up on one elbow, concern flooding through him. "You can tell me anything, Zara. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Zara said quickly, reaching up to touch his face. "In fact, I think everything is very right. Marcus, I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Marcus could not process the words. He stared at Zara, his mind blank, and then suddenly the meaning crashed over him like a wave. A baby. They were going to have a baby. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. As certain as I can be, Zara replied. I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. Clara confirmed it last week when I went to visit her. She has experience with these things. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, something that rarely happened. He cupped Zara's face in his hands and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. This is the most wonderful news I have ever received. You have made me so happy, Zara. Happier than I ever thought possible. Zara's own tears spilled over, and she laughed through them. I was so nervous to tell you I did not know if you were ready for children, if we were ready. Ready or not, we will figure it out together, Marcus promised, just like we have figured out everything else. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Marcus found himself marveling at the changes in Zara's body, the way she seemed to glow with an inner light. He became even more protective of her, insisting that she rest more and work less, though Zara protested that she was perfectly capable of maintaining her normal routine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Marcus, she told him one afternoon when he tried to take over her task of feeding the chickens. I am not made of glass. I know that, Marcus replied, but you are carrying our child, and I will not take any chances with either of your lives. Humor me, please. Zara sighed but relented, allowing Marcus to fuss over her even when she found it excessive. Clara visited often, checking on Zara's progress and offering advice based on her own experiences helping women through childbirth. Marcus was grateful for her presence, for the knowledge she brought, and the reassurance she provided. Spring arrived with new life bursting forth everywhere Marcus looked. The cattle had calves, the fields turned green, and Zara's belly swelled with their growing child. Marcus added a room onto the farmhouse, working late into the evenings to ensure it would be ready before the baby arrived. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Zara sewed blankets and tiny gowns from fabric she had ordered from a shop in town. In late May, when the air was warm and sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers, Zara went into labor. Clara arrived within an hour of Marcus's frantic summons, and she took charge with the calm authority of someone who had done this many times before. Marcus was banished to the main room of the house, left to pace and worry while the women worked in the bedroom. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. Marcus heard Zara cry out in pain, heard Clara's soothing voice offering encouragement, and felt utterly helpless. He had faced down stampeding cattle, brutal winters, and the crushing loneliness of isolation, but nothing had prepared him for this, for listening to the woman he loved suffer while he could do nothing to help her. Finally, as the sun began to set, Marcus heard a new sound, a baby's cry, thin and reedy but unmistakably alive. His heart stopped, then started again double time, and he stood frozen, waiting for someone to tell him what was happening. The bedroom door opened, and Clara emerged, her sleeves rolled up, and a tired smile on her face. You have a son, Marcus, a healthy, strong boy, and Zara is doing well, though she is exhausted. You can come meet him now. Marcus's legs felt like they might give out, but he forced himself to move, to walk into the bedroom where Zara lay propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, and her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made, and when Marcus approached, she shifted the blanket to reveal a small, red face with eyes squeezed shut. Meet your son, Zara whispered, her voice hoarse. Meet Matthew Montgomery. Marcus reached out with trembling hands to touch the baby's cheek, barely daring to breathe. Matthew, he repeated, after my father. Zara nodded. I thought it would be fitting. Your father would have been proud of the man you have become, Marcus, and I want our son to carry that legacy. Marcus bent to kiss Zara's forehead, then carefully took Matthew into his arms, cradling him as though he were made of spun glass. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but searching, and Marcus felt something shift inside him, a reordering of priorities, a deepening of purpose. This tiny person, This perfect combination of him and Zara was depending on him to provide and protect and love unconditionally. "I will never let anything happen to you," Marcus murmured to his son. "I promise you that. You and your mother, you are my whole world." Matthew yawned, a comically small gesture, and then settled back into sleep, apparently content with this declaration. Zara watched them with soft eyes, and Clara bustled around the room, tidying up and making sure Zara had everything she needed. The weeks following Matthew's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days, but Marcus had never been happier. He marveled at how someone so small could command so much attention, could reduce two capable adults to anxious wrecks over every whimper and sneeze. Zara recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as she adapted to the demands of motherhood. Marcus found himself talking to Matthew the way Zara talked to the cattle, explaining everything he was doing as he worked around the ranch with the baby strapped to his chest in a sling Zara had fashioned. Matthew seemed to enjoy the movement and the sound of his father's voice, often falling asleep to the rhythm of Marcus's steps and the cadence of his explanations. "You see, son, we have to check the fence line every few days to make sure there are no weak spots," Marcus would say as he walked the perimeter of the property. "A weak fence means the cattle can get out, and then we have a whole mess to deal with. Your mother would not be happy if I lost her favorite cows because I did not maintain the fence properly." The cattle seemed fascinated by the baby, gathering at the fence to observe whenever Marcus brought Matthew near. Zara joked that they were jealous of the attention, that they missed having her all to themselves. "They will just have to learn to share," Marcus replied with a grin. "Matthew needs his mother, and they will have to accept that." But Zara made sure to spend time with the cattle when she could, bringing Matthew with her and introducing him to each animal by name. "This is Daisy," she would say, holding Matthew up so the heifer could see him. "She was the first one to let me pet her, and this is Buttercup, and that big fellow over there is Duke. They are all part of our family, Matthew. You will grow up knowing them, and they will know you." As the summer progressed, Marcus and Zara fell into a new routine, one that revolved around their son but still included the work of the ranch. They hired a young man from town to help with some of the heavier labor, giving Marcus more time to spend with his family. The ranch continued to prosper, and Marcus began to think about expanding further, maybe buying some of the adjacent land that had recently gone up for sale. One evening, as they sat on the porch with Matthew sleeping in Zara's arms, Marcus brought up the idea. "I was thinking about the Peterson property. He is getting too old to farm it, and his children have all moved east. He might be willing to sell at a reasonable price, and it would nearly double our land." Zara considered this, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on Matthew's back. "We would need more help if we expanded. You cannot manage that much land with just yourself and one hired hand." "I know," Marcus agreed, "but I think it could be worth it. We could run more cattle, grow more crops, build something substantial to leave to Matthew and any other children we might have." Zara smiled at that, the mention of more children. "I would not be opposed to more children when the time is right. Matthew should have siblings, people to grow up with and depend on. I missed that after my siblings died in the epidemic. Being alone is hard." "He will never be alone," Marcus promised. "He has us, and he has Clara, and we will make sure he grows up surrounded by love." Marcus did buy the Peterson property, negotiating a fair price that left both parties satisfied. The expansion meant more work, but it also meant more security, more stability for his growing family. He hired 2 more men to help with the ranch, both of them young and eager to learn, and Zara took over managing the household accounts, proving to have a head for numbers that surprised and delighted Marcus. As Matthew grew from an infant to a toddler, his personality began to emerge. He was a curious child, always getting into things he should not, but he was also affectionate and quick to laugh. He adored the cattle, toddling after them as soon as he could walk, and Marcus often had to scoop him up to keep him from wandering into dangerous situations. "He is just like you," Zara would say. Watching Matthew try to help Marcus with chores he was far too small to manage. Determined and fearless, and so full of love for this land. When Matthew was 2 years old, Zara discovered she was pregnant again, and this time Marcus was prepared for the journey. He knew what to expect. knew how to support Zara through the discomfort and anxiety, knew that the result would be worth every difficult moment. Their second child, a daughter they named Miriam after Zara's mother, was born in early spring. She was smaller than Matthew had been, more delicate in appearance, but she had Zara's fierce spirit from the very beginning. Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing her clothes to feeding her, though his help was often more hindrance than assistance. With 2 children and a thriving ranch, Marcus and Zara's lives were full to bursting. There were days when Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of responsibility resting on his shoulders. But then he would look at his family, at Zara singing to Miriam while Matthew played at her feet, and he would remember why it was all worth it. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Matthew started helping with real chores by the time he was 5, feeding chickens and collecting eggs with Zara's supervision. Miriam proved to be just as enamored with the animals as her parents, spending hours in the barn talking to the horses and cattle, carrying on the tradition Zara had started all those years ago. Clara remained a constant presence in their lives, often staying at the ranch for weeks at a time to help with the children. She taught Miriam to sew and cook, passed on recipes that had been in their family for generations. Marcus was grateful for her, for the way she had welcomed him into her family despite her initial reservations, for the support she provided without being asked. When Matthew was 8 and Miriam was 6, Zara gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Martin. He was the spitting image of Marcus, with the same dark hair and serious expression, though he softened quickly into smiles when his siblings were around. Matthew took his role as oldest brother seriously, watching over both Miriam and Martin with a protectiveness that reminded Marcus of himself. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under Marcus's management. He became known in the region as a fair man to do business with, someone whose word could be trusted. Other ranchers sought his advice on cattle breeding and land management, and Marcus found himself becoming a respected member of the community in a way he had never expected. Through it all, Zara remained his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word. They still spent time with the cattle when they could steal moments away from the chaos of raising 3 children, walking the fence line together as they had in the early days of their courtship. Marcus never took for granted the way Zara's hand felt in his, the sound of her laughter, the knowledge that she had chosen him, chosen this life, and never once expressed regret. One evening when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Marcus and Zara sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were bright overhead, the air warm with the promise of summer, and Marcus pulled Zara close against his side. "Do you remember the first time I found you talking to my cattle?" Marcus asked, his voice soft with nostalgia. Zara laughed quietly. "How could I forget? I was terrified you were going to chase me off your property for trespassing. Instead, you told me they needed a kind voice." "They did," Marcus said, "and so did I, though I did not realize it at the time. You changed everything for me, Zara. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You gave me a reason to build something permanent, to put down roots and invest in a future." Zara tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You gave me the same thing. After my parents died, I felt adrift, like I was waiting for my life to start but did not know how to make it happen. Coming here, meeting you, it was like finding the missing piece I did not know I was looking for." Marcus kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring all of his love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, Zara rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. The children grew older, each developing their own interests and talents. Matthew became an excellent horseman, able to handle even the most difficult animals with patience and skill. He talked about taking over the ranch someday, about continuing what Marcus had built. And Marcus felt a deep pride knowing that his son wanted to carry on the legacy. Miriam showed an aptitude for numbers like her mother, keeping careful records of the ranch's expenses and income by the time she was 12. She also inherited Zara's way with animals, spending hours in the pasture talking to the cattle and horses, singing to them the way her mother had. Marcus often caught himself watching her and seeing Zara as she had been when he first found her, young and full of kindness that the world had not yet beaten out of her. Martin was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about the world beyond their ranch, about the cities and territories he had only heard about in stories. Marcus encouraged his curiosity, buying him books when he could afford them, telling him about the places he had traveled before settling in Independence. Marcus suspected Martin might not stay on the ranch forever, that he might venture out to forge his own path, and while the thought saddened him, he also understood it. Every person needed to find their own way. When Matthew was 16, he asked Marcus if he could start working on a section of the ranch as his own, building his skills in preparation for eventually taking over the entire operation. Marcus agreed, dividing off a portion of land and giving Matthew full responsibility for it. It was a test of sorts, a way to see if Matthew was truly ready for the demands of ranch management, and Marcus was pleased to see his son rise to the challenge. Miriam began keeping more detailed records of the ranch's breeding programs, tracking bloodlines and characteristics to improve the quality of their cattle. Her meticulous notes became invaluable, and Marcus often consulted with her before making decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell. Martin continued his education through correspondence courses, determined to learn everything he could. He talked about becoming a teacher or maybe a lawyer, professions that would require him to leave the ranch. Zara worried about him striking out on his own, but Marcus reminded her that they had raised him to be independent, to follow his dreams wherever they might lead. As Marcus approached his 50s, he began to think about legacy in more concrete terms. He had built something substantial out of the ramshackle inheritance his uncle had left him, transformed a lonely piece of land into a thriving ranch that supported his family and provided employment for several others. But more than that, he had built a family filled with love and purpose, children who knew they were valued and supported no matter what path they chose. One afternoon, Marcus found himself standing at the fence of the cattle pasture watching the herd graze peacefully. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Zara approaching, her hair now streaked with silver but her smile as bright as ever. "They still love you more than they love me," Marcus said, nodding toward the cattle. Zara laughed and leaned against the fence beside him. "I have been talking to them for over 20 years. I should hope they love me by now." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying a lonely cowboy with more land than sense, and cattle that needed a kind voice?" "Not for a single moment," Zara replied firmly. "You and this ranch, our children, and this life we have built together, it is everything I could have wanted and more than I dared to dream of when I was a grieving young woman with nowhere to belong. You gave me a home, Marcus. You gave me love. You gave me purpose. How could I ever regret that?" Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, Zara had the power to move him with her words, to make him feel like the luckiest man alive. They stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The cattle lowed softly, and in the distance, Marcus could hear his children's voices as they finished their evening chores. This was his life, the life he had built with the woman who had walked onto his property all those years ago and changed everything. As the last light faded from the sky, Marcus and Zara walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, ready for whatever the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. The ranch would continue, their children would grow and forge their own paths, and the love that had started with a lonely cowboy and a kind-hearted woman talking to cattle would endure for generations to come. Years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Matthew married a young woman from town named Sarah, and they moved into a house Marcus helped them build on the far edge of the property. Within 2 years, they had given Marcus and Zara their first grandchild, a robust boy they named James. Marcus found himself enchanted by his grandson in ways that surprised him, understanding for the first time how his own father must have felt watching him grow up. Miriam married at 22 to a banker's son from Kansas City who appreciated her sharp mind and business acumen. They settled in the city, but Miriam returned often to help with the ranch's financial planning. She never lost her love for the animals, and whenever she visited, she spent hours in the pasture, continuing the tradition of talking to the cattle that her mother had started decades earlier. Martin did indeed leave the ranch, heading east to attend university and then establishing himself as a teacher in St. Louis. He wrote letters regularly, sharing news of his life and expressing gratitude for the foundation his parents had given him. Marcus missed having Martin nearby, but he was proud of his son for pursuing his dreams with such dedication. Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep when Marcus was 55, and the loss hit both him and Zara hard. She had been a constant in their lives, a source of wisdom and stability, and the ranch felt emptier without her presence. They buried her in the small cemetery near the church where Marcus and Zara had been married, and Zara planted wildflowers around her grave that bloomed every spring. As Marcus entered his 60s, he gradually handed over more of the ranch's daily operations to Matthew, who had proven himself more than capable of running things. Marcus found himself with more free time than he had enjoyed in decades, and he used it to pursue small projects he had always put off. He built a larger porch onto the farmhouse, created a garden space where Zara could grow vegetables and flowers, and spent long afternoons with his grandchildren, teaching them about the land and the animals the way he had taught their parents. The cattle herd had grown substantially over the years, and the Montgomery Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in western Missouri. But Marcus was most proud not of the financial success, but of the way they treated their animals. Thanks to Zara's influence, every cow on the property received individual attention and care, was treated as a creature deserving of kindness and respect. Other ranchers sometimes mocked them for what they saw as unnecessary sentimentality, but Marcus did not care. His cattle were healthier, calmer, and more productive than most, and he attributed that directly to the culture of compassion Zara had established. On a warm afternoon in late summer, Marcus found Zara in the pasture, sitting on a stool she had carried out from the barn. She was talking to an old heifer that had been part of the original herd Marcus had inherited, one of the few remaining from those early days. The heifer's muzzle was gray with age, and she moved slowly, but she still came to the fence whenever Zara appeared. "Remember when I first found you doing this?" Marcus asked, approaching quietly so as not to startle either woman or cow. Zara glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "I remember you looking at me like I had lost my mind." "I thought I had lost mine," Marcus corrected, settling onto the ground beside her stool. Standing there in the heat, hearing this beautiful voice talking to my cattle about clouds and weather and loneliness, I was certain I was hallucinating. And now here we are, 40 years later, and I am still doing it, Zara said, reaching through the fence to stroke the heifer's face. "Some things never change." "Some things should not change," Marcus said softly. He reached up to take Zara's free hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You were right that day, you know. They did need a kind voice. We all did. And you provided it, not just to the cattle but to me, to our children, to everyone whose life you touched." Zara's eyes glistened with tears. "We built something good here, did we not? Something worth having, worth fighting for." "We built something extraordinary," Marcus agreed, "and it all started because you stopped to talk to some lonely cattle." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The cattle grazed peacefully around them, and in the distance Marcus could see Matthew working with one of the horses, could hear the laughter of grandchildren playing near the barn. This was legacy, he thought. Not just land and cattle and buildings, but love passed down through generations, kindness taught by example, the simple but profound act of caring for creatures that could not care for themselves. As darkness fell, Marcus and Zara made their way back to the farmhouse, walking slowly, in no hurry to end the day. They had earned this peace, this quiet contentment, through years of hard work and dedication, through choosing each other every single day, even when things were difficult. Their love had not been a lightning strike, instant and consuming. It had been a slow burn, building steadily from friendship to romance to the deep, abiding partnership that sustained them now. That night, lying in bed with Zara's head resting on his chest, Marcus reflected on the strange turns life could take. He had been a drifter with no direction, no purpose beyond simple survival. And then a young woman had wandered onto his property, drawn by the lonely sounds of his cattle, and everything had changed. She had seen something in him worth nurturing, just as she had seen something in those animals worth her time and attention. "Thank you," Marcus whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Zara murmured, half asleep. "For stopping that day, for talking to the cattle, for staying, for loving me, for all of it." Zara pressed a kiss to his chest. "Thank you for letting me stay, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and a purpose. I love you, Marcus Montgomery. I have loved you from the moment you told me those cattle needed a kind voice, because I knew then that you were a man who understood what really mattered." They drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The ranch slept around them, cattle settling in for the night, horses dozing in their stalls, the land itself seeming to breathe a contented sigh. The following years brought more grandchildren, more weddings, more joy mixed with the inevitable sorrows of aging. Marcus and Zara grew old together gracefully, their love deepening rather than diminishing with time. They remained active on the ranch as long as their bodies allowed, though they gradually ceded more responsibility to Matthew and his growing sons. When Marcus was 70, he suffered a fall from his horse that laid him up for several weeks. Zara nursed him back to health with the same patience and care she had always shown the animals, and Marcus found himself grateful all over again for the gift of her presence in his life. He had seen men grow bitter as they aged, angry at the limitations their failing bodies imposed, but Marcus could not muster that bitterness. He had lived a full life, had loved deeply, and been loved in return, had built something that would outlast him. What more could a man ask for? Zara's health remained good well into her 70s, though arthritis made some of her work more difficult. She could no longer spend as much time in the pastures as she once had, but she still made daily visits to the cattle, still talked to them about everything and nothing, still made sure they knew they were valued. The younger animals that had never known the ranch without her responded to her voice the same way the old ones had, gathering at the fence whenever she appeared, pushing against each other for the chance to be near her. One spring morning, when wildflowers carpeted the fields and the air was sweet with the scent of new grass, Marcus woke to find Zara already up and dressed, sitting in the rocking chair by the window. "It is early yet," Marcus said, his voice rough with sleep. "Come back to bed." "I want to go out to the pasture," Zara said, and something in her tone made Marcus pay attention. "I want to see them one more time in the early morning light, the way I used to when we were young." Marcus studied his wife's face, noting the peaceful expression, the clarity in her eyes. He did not question her or suggest they wait. Instead, he got up, dressed quickly, and offered her his arm. Together they walked out to the cattle pasture, moving slowly but steadily. The cattle were already awake, some grazing, others lying in the grass enjoying the cool morning air. When Zara approached the fence, they came to her as they always had, and she greeted each one by name, touching their faces, murmuring words of affection. Marcus stood back slightly, giving her space, watching the scene with a full heart. "They have always known you loved them," Marcus said. "Every single one of them." "Love is not complicated," Zara replied without turning around. "It just requires showing up, paying attention, and caring even when it would be easier not to. That applies to animals and to people." "You taught me that, Marcus, or maybe I taught you. Either way, we learned it together." They stayed in the pasture until the sun had fully risen, until the rest of the ranch began to wake and stir. Matthew appeared looking for them, and Marcus saw the question in his son's eyes, but Matthew did not interrupt, simply stood nearby in case he was needed. Finally, Zara stepped back from the fence and took Marcus's arm again. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for this life, for loving me so well, for being exactly who I needed you to be." Marcus felt fear clutch at his chest, the sense that she was saying goodbye even though they were just walking back to the house for breakfast. "You are not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. "We still have time, Zara. We have years yet." Zara smiled at him, that brilliant smile that had captured his heart 4 decades earlier. "We have had a lifetime, my love, and what a lifetime it has been." Zara passed away peacefully 3 days later in her sleep, with Marcus holding her hand. The doctor said her heart simply gave out, that after 75 years of beating steadily, it had decided its work was done. Marcus knew the truth was both simpler and more complex. Zara had lived fully, loved deeply, and when she sensed the end approaching, she had made her peace with it. The funeral drew people from all over the region, friends and family and neighbors whose lives Zara had touched. Story after story emerged of her kindness, her wisdom, her gentle humor. Marcus listened to them all, finding comfort in knowing that others had seen in Zara what he had always known. She had been extraordinary, and the world was diminished by her absence. But the ranch carried on, as Zara would have wanted. Matthew and his sons ran the daily operations, and Marcus found purpose in teaching his grandchildren the lessons Zara had taught him about kindness and compassion, about seeing the value in all creatures, about showing up and caring even when it was difficult. Marcus still went out to the cattle pasture every day, talking to the animals the way Zara had, telling them about his day, about the memories he carried, about how much he missed her. The cattle listened with their patient brown eyes, and sometimes Marcus could have sworn they understood that they mourned her absence the same way he did. One evening, as Marcus stood at the fence watching the sunset, he felt a presence beside him. He turned to find his youngest grandson, a boy of 10 named Zachary, standing there with a serious expression. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" Zachary said. "Of course, son. Anything." "Did you really find Grandma talking to the cattle the first time you met her?" Marcus smiled. The memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday instead of more than 40 years ago. "I did. I thought she was the strangest, most wonderful person I had ever seen. She was standing right about here, telling a heifer about the clouds." "And you said they needed a kind voice," Zachary continued, clearly having heard the story before. "Why did you say that?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because it was true. Those cattle were lonely, and so was I, though I did not realize it at the time. Your grandmother saw that, understood it in a way most people would not have. She had a gift for recognizing when something or someone needed care, and she never hesitated to provide it. That is how I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. Anyone who could care that much about a bunch of cattle was someone worth holding on to." Zachary nodded thoughtfully. "I miss her." "I miss her too," Marcus admitted, "every single day. But she is still here in a way, in the things she taught us, in the way we treat these animals, in the love she left behind. That does not die, Zachary. That goes on." They stood together in silence, grandfather and grandson, watching as the last light faded from the sky. And Marcus knew that this too was legacy, this passing down of stories and values, this continuation of the work Zara had started when she stopped to offer kindness to creatures that could not ask for it but desperately needed it nonetheless. Marcus lived another 5 years, long enough to see Matthew's youngest son marry and start a family of his own, long enough to know that the ranch would continue for generations. He remained active until nearly the end, still visiting the cattle daily, still telling stories about Zara to anyone who would listen. When Marcus finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, his family buried him next to Zara under the oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. They placed a simple stone marker that read, "Marcus Montgomery, beloved husband, father, and friend to all creatures." It was what he would have wanted. The ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's care and eventually under his children's care. The tradition of talking to the cattle, of treating them with individual care and respect, was passed down through the generations, becoming as much a part of the Montgomery ranch identity as the brand they used on their cattle. Years later, when Matthew was an old man himself, a young couple came to visit the ranch, interested in learning their methods for raising healthy, productive cattle. As Matthew showed them around, they came to the pasture where the main herd grazed. "This is beautiful land," the young woman said, watching the cattle contentedly munching grass. "And your animals seem so calm, so healthy." "It is because we talk to them," Matthew explained, smiling at the confused looks on their faces. "It started with my mother, decades ago. She believed that all creatures needed kindness and attention, needed to know they mattered. My father agreed with her, and they built this ranch on that principle. We have never deviated from it." "You talk to your cattle?" the young man asked skeptically. "Every single day," Matthew confirmed. "You would be surprised what a difference a kind voice can make. My father used to say that his cattle were lonely before my mother came along, that they needed someone to see them as individuals rather than just livestock. She did that, and everything changed. The ranch became more successful, yes, but more importantly, it became a place built on compassion rather than just profit." The young couple exchanged glances, and Matthew could see they were trying to decide if he was serious or if this was some elaborate joke. He did not mind. His parents had faced the same skepticism, and they had simply continued doing what they knew was right. "If you are interested in learning our methods, you are welcome to stay for a few days," Matthew offered. "See for yourself how we operate. But I will tell you now, if you cannot see the value in treating animals with kindness, then this might not be the right approach for you." The young woman stepped forward, her expression earnest. "I would like to learn. I've always felt that there had to be a better way, something more humane. If you are willing to teach us, we are willing to learn." Matthew smiled, seeing in her the same spark he remembered in his mother, the same openness to seeing beyond convention to something truer and more meaningful. "Then let me start by introducing you to the herd. Each one has a name and a personality. You will learn them all before you leave." And so the work continued, the legacy Marcus and Zara had built together extending far beyond their own lives, touching people and animals they would never meet, creating ripples that spread outward into the world. It had all started with a lonely cowboy, a kind-hearted woman, and the simple recognition that everyone and everything deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. The sun set over the Montgomery ranch as it had done for decades, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the cattle settled in for the night, secure in the knowledge that they were cared for, that they mattered, that a kind voice would greet them again when morning came. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of the world, but to those cattle, to that ranch, to the generations of the Montgomery family who had built their lives around this principle, it was everything. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their work on earth is done, Marcus and Zara watched over it all, their hands clasped together, their love as strong in death as it had been in life, knowing that the seeds they had planted so long ago had grown into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, had built a life together based on kindness and compassion, and had created a legacy that would never be forgotten. The story of the cowboy and the woman who talked to his cattle became part of local legend, told and retold with each generation, a reminder that love can begin in the most unexpected ways, that kindness is never wasted, and that the simple act of caring can change everything. It was a story about two people who saw value where others saw none, who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives, who understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the connections we forge and the love we leave behind. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or the financial success they achieved, but the love they shared, the family they raised, the example they set for others to follow. Marcus and Zara had lived fully and loved deeply, and their story would continue to inspire as long as there were people willing to listen, to learn, and to open their hearts to the transformative power of a kind voice speaking to lonely souls who desperately needed to hear it.